Well, good morning. It's great to be with you guys this morning. My name is David Black. If we haven't met, I'm a campus pastor here at Grace Church, and we're glad that you would pick a rainy, dreary, cold day to come and be with us. And so I just appreciate that because at Grace Church, we're always asking this question: how can we make the gospel more clear and more accessible? And one of the ways that we do that is just through talking about the good news of Jesus and how that works as a gathered church together. So thanks for being here. If you're at home on the live stream, just real quick, we had 2 lights blow this morning. So if I look a little bit darker, I did not get a tan. We're not doing that for mood. That's just how we have to roll today. So that's kind of where we're at. I would also say if you're visiting with us for the first time, if you're a guest here, I just want to say you don't have to be a follower of Jesus to be here. And so if you're exploring Jesus, we're honored that you'd just take this opportunity to do that. If you are a follower of Jesus, we're just glad that you would connect with us. Today is a great Sunday to do that because we are starting a new series entitled God Is. And I'm excited as a pastor for this because I think that this series has the potential to impact and shape kind of like where we're headed this quarter, this spring, this year in 2021. In fact, I think what we're talking about specifically has the potential to not only shape our life as a church, but quite possibly your family, your marriage, yourself, and honestly, even your walk with God. Now, you say that's a pretty high bar. Why would you say that? Well, I would say that because what we're talking about matters more than almost anything else. And that's this. We're talking about our view or your view of God. Now, that may not be a surprise to you. You're like, shocker, I came to a church and they're talking about God and they think it's important. But we're doing more than that, and to kind of get you on the same page this morning, I thought we could just start by asking you a question. And that question is this: if you were to answer or at least fill in this statement, how would you finish this statement? If I said, God is... and let you, yeah, okay, I heard you say maybe a little bit out loud, that's fine. You don't have to do it out loud, but in your head, maybe, like what is it that comes to your mind? You know, maybe some of us, we can do this quickly. Like, oh, I grew up in church, I got the Sunday school answer. Maybe for some of us, because of the week that we had, we would do this difficultly, right? Maybe some of us, because of where we want and where we're headed and maybe some disappointments in life, I'd say, I know what I would do this and answer hesitantly. Like, I kind of know how I'd hesitantly answer that. But I just encourage you, like right now, like I know you drove in and who knows what happened on the way here and all that. Just like where you are, think about this. Seriously, think about how you would answer this today. You say, well, why? Well, because it is immensely important. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a pastor. I'm saying that because here's what happens. Our view of God actually has the potential to shape how we view other things. In other words, how you fill in this blank actually has a lot to do with how you fill in the blank of parenting, or how you fill in the blank of marriage, or how you fill in the blank of your job or employment, or how you fill in the blank of being a neighbor or a citizen, right? Or a follower of that God. In fact, how you fill in this blank actually fills in a lot of blanks in your life. In school, where you go to school to study the Bible, it's famously said in the class, like, hey, define God and give 3 examples, right? Like, it's kind of like the challenge of what we're trying to do. But listen, I was just curious, how would you define him? Let me make it a little bit harder. If you had to answer this question in 140 characters or less, how would you do it? God in a tweet. If you just had to tweet God, what would you think? This is so important that a theologian named A.W. Tozer, in his book, The Knowledge of the Holy, says this. He says this: what comes into our mind when we think about God is the most important thing about us. It's a huge statement. He goes on to say, the history of mankind will probably show that no people has ever risen above its religion, and no religion has ever been greater than its idea of God. And he finishes this way. He says, we tend by a secret law of the soul to move toward our mental image of God, whatever that is. We tend, here's what he's saying, He's saying you and I, whether we want to or not, we're wired to begin to move gradually to this idea of who we think God is. We tend to reflect that, and more than reflecting it, it tends to become a lens or a filter that we put on our life. And so, for example, maybe when I said God is blank, you instantly would answer this question factually. And so maybe in your mind, some words come to mind, like big. God is big. God is strong. God is, creator. He made everything. Maybe for you, you grew up in church, you heard the song we just sang, so the first thing that comes to your mind is like, God is holy. He's other. He's set apart. Maybe for you, you went to school, you got a little bit of biblical education, some big words, and so you're like, God is omnipotent. God is omnipresent. God is like larger words that all types of people have come up with to say and try to describe and encapsulate God. Maybe for you, though, maybe for some of us, it's not just factual. Maybe for some of us, it's actually relational. So you're like, I don't know about facts. Don't confuse me with terms. God is love, right? God is love. Don't know, maybe more than that. Do we really need to know more than that? Right? God, that's just, can we just love everybody? That's who God is. For some of you, maybe it's like a mother or father. I just like to think about God as mother or God as father. Maybe for you, relationally, you would say God is affirming. Like he just wants to affirm us. And maybe the most important thing you could know about God is that he just affirms you in all your you-ness. Right? Maybe that's what you think. Maybe for some of us, though, you'd say God is actually maybe more than that. Maybe he's inclusive. He includes everybody. Some of us may not answer it factually. Some of us may not answer it relationally. For some of us, though, and here's what I found to be true as a pastor, oftentimes when I'm talking to individuals and talking about God, the way that we're navigating that and the way that we start with that tends to be emotionally and oftentimes experientially. And so sometimes people would say, well, here's what God is like. God is neglecting. God is, it feels like he's totally like, I haven't heard from God. He hasn't written in a while. He hasn't called, right? Some of us might say God is angry. Like I grew up in a church when I was younger. And in that church, I learned one thing, that God was, angry with me. That whatever it was, he wasn't happy with me. He wasn't pleased with me. Here's another one. Maybe for you, God is cruel. I don't understand suffering. I don't understand hospitals. And anytime I visit a hospital, I go, how, right? Maybe that's your narrative. God is cruel. If there is a God, man, he's cruel. Maybe for some of us, though, you'd say God is unpredictable. I don't do religion. I don't do God because God's unpredictable. I don't get close. He does his thing. I do my thing. Or she does her thing. And I do my thing. You know what? I'm fine with all that. Right? Here's what happens, though. Regardless of how we answer this and how we approach it, we all of us view our world and our relationship through this lens. And so what happens is, quite honestly, if God is angry with you, if he's displeased with you, if he's always out to inspect you and get you, chances are you might actually navigate life a little bit feeling guilty, a little bit feeling anxious about where you are and who he is in that relationship. And so that's going to affect not just Sunday morning. That's not just going to affect, that's going to affect how you view your city, your neighbors, your kids, your spouse, and spill over into the rest of life, right? We are all trying to fill in this blank. God is. And in fact, you may have come up with a way. You might say, the reason I'm here this morning actually is not so I can fill in the blank myself, but so that you, pastor, that's your job. I come and the pastor fills in the blank. That's why I'm here. Or maybe for some of you, that's why I chose my faith tradition. Someone's got to fill it in for me, so why don't the faith people fill that in for me? Maybe that's for you. Maybe some of us, we grew up, and in family, we were just born with a family, and that family handed you a thing to fill in this blank. That family from the very beginning filled in the God blank for you. And maybe for some of us who are older, maybe it's our experience and maybe your experience that as you grew up, maybe the answer, the fill in the blank answer that your family gave you could be that doesn't really work anymore. And you're kind of kicking around and you haven't really told anyone about that. And maybe you haven't been honest yet about that with yourself. And you're kind of going, man, to be honest, I don't know. Because what I thought doesn't fit in that blank anymore. And I think the danger with trying to do this and actually honestly answer this for ourselves would be that we might begin to look inside ourselves for answers. B.B. Warfield said one of the issues with doing this is he said, he who begins by seeking God within himself may end up by confusing himself with God. I just thought, man, that's really practical. That's decent advice right there. You say, well, if I can't look inside myself, well, where am I going to look? And in case you're going, man, I don't know. Why are we talking about this? In case you're saying, look, this is a church conversation. I got life to deal with. Here's what I would say to you. This conversation is not just happening on Sunday mornings in church in our culture. This conversation actually is one that continues on throughout our society today. In fact, 2-3 weeks ago, we had something happen. I don't know if you've been watching the news, right? You're like, I've been trying not to watch the news, right? I don't know if you've been watching the news, but something happened that just kind of blew it up, right? So there's a guy, he's a representative, his name's Emmanuel Cleaver, and he actually ended his prayer one day at the Capitol by saying, "A man and a woman." Right? Now, and that just took off. People were tweeting it out. People were angry about it. Everyone was talking about it. There were articles, there were blogs. The internet just took that and ran with it, right? Now, I don't know what he was thinking or what he was intending. And to be honest, this morning, I don't really want to focus on the whole a man and a woman thing. Because even though that was a thing that took off, here's actually something I think I found more striking. He actually wrote this out, and so here's the end of his prayer. You have that in front of you. He says this. He says, "We ask it in the name of the monotheistic God, Brahma, and God known by many names, by many faiths, a man and a woman." I actually think that the most striking thing that he could say in this ending is not the word Brahma or a man or a woman. I think it's actually this, many names. Because I think what he's actually saying is just reflecting the way that our culture and our people, we tend to think about it. In fact, here's what we tend to say in the United States. If there is a God, you figure it out. And what other name you come up with, that good for you. Right? You do you. You do that name for God however you want to do that name for God. And you figure that out. But here's kind of what I want to do, and here's what we're doing as a series. What if there was somewhere else besides ourselves and besides us individually that we could start when it comes to who God is? What would it look like actually to kind of ask the question, where else might we find it? And listen, while I believe it is helpful, I believe it's helpful to fill in the blank. I actually think it's more helpful to not stay there and move beyond that. And so for the next 6 weeks, we're going to move beyond that and answer this question: where can we look to find out and fill in that blank? And the place that we're going to look is actually pretty incredible. It's actually in Exodus 34. You say, why Exodus 34? Because here's why. In Exodus 34, we find something striking. The God of the Bible, for the first time, audibly, for himself, says, "This is my name. This is who I am." And in 140 characters, actually, or less, in 27 Hebrew words, he describes himself. And he says, "This is who I am." Now, before we turn there, there's some things you need to know about this passage, these two verses that we're going to take a look at. These two verses that we're going to take a look at are the most quoted verse in the Bible by the Bible. You say, what? Yeah, well, in the Bible, here's what happened. The Bible's not just a book. It's many books written over thousands of years by individuals who are moved by God to tell the story of who God is. God's showing himself to us, right? And as they did this, they would actually point to each other's writings, and they tie it all together. And so in the Bible, here's what you'll find. These verses, this section where God audibly kind of tweets out who he is, his press release, this is so important that it's quoted at least 30 times from the Old Testament and the New Testament, in poetry and in narrative and in history. Here's what we'll find. We find that authors of the Bible, they cite this. They refer to this in whole or in pieces. They pray this. In the Bible, here's what you'll find. People even complain about this section of Scripture, right? They get angry, and they use this to kind of like push it back at God. And sometimes they celebrate, and they just sing this back to him. Right? So I thought maybe we could start there. And so if you have your Bibles, go ahead and get them out and turn to Exodus 34. If you don't, it'll be on the screen. There's also a row Bible with you. I believe it's on page 62, if you have it next to you. And so here's what it is. We're going to look at it in verse 6 and 7. I'm going to give you verse 5 just for a little bit of context. And here's what we see. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him, Moses. Okay, so God and Moses. There's a mountain, there's a cloud there. And proclaimed the name of the Lord. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed. Now here it is. 140 characters, 27 Hebrew letters, most quoted passage in the Bible, from the Bible, by the Bible. So he says, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and fourth generation. And that's it. That's the first time audibly God speaks for himself in the Bible and says, this is my name. This is who I am. Now, for some of us, you may have grown up at church and that's familiar to you. You go, yeah, I knew exactly where we're going. For others of us, maybe you didn't know exactly, but you go, a whole host of us probably, to be honest, were like, I never even knew that was in there. That's why I don't read Exodus, to be fair, right? That right there. I'm not sure what to do with that. And there are others of us from all those categories who go, look, whether I'm familiar with that or whether I didn't know it existed, I have a whole host of questions. Like, why is the Lord capitalized? Why is it repeated? Why does God repeat himself? Here's another question, like, why in the world does God talk about mercy and grace? I'm glad he does, but why does he do that here? I didn't think the Old Testament God talked like that. Or maybe you're like, what's with the children's children thing? God hates kids? Like, what in the world? Do the kids, power kids, know about this? What's going on up there, right? Like, you're going, what do I do with that? And here's what I would say if that's you and you're kind of navigating that. Here's my word of caution and just kind of my ask. Like, what we're doing today is the introduction, okay? It's just the introduction. And while there's a lot that we could say about this, and a lot, quite honestly, that we will say about all of these sections of verses in the weeks to come, here's what we're doing today. Today we're just laying the groundwork for what's going on in this weird, provocative, very interesting, quotable portion of Scripture. What I would like to do today, if you would let me for the remainder of our time, is simply just do this. Like, why is God saying this? And how in the world did we get here? Okay? Those are the two questions I just want. Before we get into what this is and the weeks to come and all this stuff, I just want to say, like, why is God saying this? Like, why now? I mean, there's chapters of the Bible before this where God created stuff, and then there was Noah, and then there was Joseph, Abraham, all those names. Like, why now in a cloud on a mountain to Moses does God say this? And how in the world did we get to this point? And here's why I want to do that, because if we don't understand the context for why this came up, I don't think we'd really understand what it is we're going to be doing for the rest of the series, okay? And to get an idea of this, there's just two things that we're going to spend our time on. Two things you need to know. These two things are happening simultaneously, and these two things are happening in the context of this, and they're this. Two things. First one is this. There's a God who wants to be known. And the second thing is there's a people who have made him up on their own. Okay? That's exactly what's going on right here. Say, what, why, and how? Well, there's a God who wants to be known. And there's a people who have made him up on their own. You say, well, what do you mean? Well, I'm glad you hypothetically asked, okay? So we're going to answer that together. To answer that, you need to understand there's a God who wants to be known. And this story actually starts all the way back in Exodus chapter 19. And this is what we find if you turn back to Exodus chapter 19. Here's where we kind of start off with this whole conversation. It says this: after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from Rephidim and came to the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. There Israel encamped before the mountain. That would be Mount Sinai, okay? So here's what's going on. A little bit of history, a little bit of background if you didn't grow up in church, all right? We're told that there is a God who wants to have a relationship with people. And so he actually comes to a guy named Abraham, and he talks to Abraham, and he says, Abraham, I want to bless you. I want to have a relationship with you and your descendants. And so he actually begins that story. Fast forward about 400 years. Abraham's descendants are in Egypt, and it's like 10 Commandments, Charlton Heston, if you're over the age of 45, right? Or Prince of Egypt, if you're in your 20s and 30s, right? Like, think Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, like that whole deal, right? The whole idea that there's Israelites in Egypt, they're slaves, and what God does is God comes to a guy named Moses, who grew up in Egypt. He says, Moses, I want you to go to the leader of Egypt, Pharaoh. I want you to tell him, God says, let my people go. And Moses does that, and Pharaoh says no. And then the plagues happen, and then God says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to rescue my people. I'm going to pull them out of slavery. I'm going to take them through on dry ground. He parts the Red Sea, and his people are rescued. They're saved. They go through the Red Sea. The Red Sea collapses on the Egyptian army, and he brings them into the wilderness, and they start traveling to this new land that God's going to show them. And on the way, they take a time out, kind of a break, a rest area around this mountain called Mount Sinai, and God actually comes to meet with them. And when he comes to meet with them, there's lightning and thunder and clouds. It's like sensory overload. But more than sensory overload, he comes to meet with them with a message and a purpose. And here's what he says. He says this: while Moses went up to God, the Lord called out to him out of the mountain, saying, thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, that's another way of saying Israelites, and tell the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings, figuratively, not Lord of the Rings, and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy, there's that word again, set apart nation. So here's what God says. I want to have a relationship with you. I want to be known by you in a biblical sense, right? That's literally what this is intimate language. This is a proposal. That's what this is. This is, I've been dating for a while, Israel. We know each other briefly. You were a slave. I came and found you. I picked you up. We went out for a while. Remember the Egyptian date? That was crazy. And after we've been through all of that, here's what I have for you. Will you marry me? That's what he's saying. The God of the universe is looking at a people and going, I want to be known by you. I want to get married. And the people are like, well, what would that be like? Can you tell me? And God goes, sure, I'll tell you what that would be like. And then he actually begins to say this. And God spoke all these words saying, I am the Lord your God. And this is the actual introduction to something that you already may be very familiar with. It's called the Ten Commandments. Now here's what I want you to see. I want you to see this. That as God is describing what this would be like, God is not saying, if you follow the Ten Commandments, then I'll have a relationship with you. See what he's saying? What does he say? I'm already the Lord your God. I'm already in relationship with you. And if we go follow this relationship further, it extrapolates out into the Ten Commandments. In other words, life with me, marriage with me, looks like no falsehood. Life with me looks like I'm the only one. There ain't other people, right? This is an exclusive deal. Life with me looks like loving your neighbor and honoring them and not wanting their stuff. Like that's what living with me is like. right? And so he does this with them. And this is, look, again, this is a God who wants to be known. God, all throughout the Bible, wants to be known. It's repeated over and over and over again. And here's what happens. Every time God wants to be known, do you know what we do as people? And said, you and me forever. And we said, nope, just me, bye. And we left. It's what he did time and time all throughout the Bible. That's what's constantly happening. God is showing up and going, hey, I'd like to know you. And we're like, ew, I'm good with distance. How about how about we call you every now and then, right? How about we email? Like, is this virtual? That'd be great, right? I'll stay in my house. And maybe I'll just put it something you can see, okay? Like you do that whole thing. Like that's what's going on here. But God wants to be known by these people. Now here's what happens. Miraculously and surprisingly, the entire people of Israel, after he tells them what he's like and what marriage is going to be, after he describes it, you know what they say? They say, yes! They say, yes, we will marry you, God. We will be your people. We will be in special relationship. And then what actually happens is Moses goes back up the mountain as kind of like their representative. They send him back up the mountain, and he goes up the mountain, and he goes up there to kind of seal the deal, like actually be part of the marriage ceremony, right? So he goes up as their representative to be like the marriage ceremony guy, and he's up there from chapters 24 all the way through chapters 31. He's up there for like 7 chapters, right? He's up there talking to God, and they're talking about what this is going to be like, and the people are down there waiting. They're waiting. They're like this. They're in the ceremony, but they're just they're the people standing next to the guy who's like doing the thing. And they're just kind of waiting and watching. And remember, as I said, there's something else going on at the same time? Well, here's what we find out. That there's a God who wants to be known, but at the exact same time as the camera pans down back to the people on the ground, here's what we have. We find a people who are making him up on their own. Say, what? Yeah, so while Moses is up in the ceremony, here's what has going down on the ground. It says this, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, I love that. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. Look at so Aaron's Moses' brother. He's kind of like the second in command, vice president. They're like, Moses, he could be dead for all we know. He's been gone for 7 chapters. I mean, they didn't know that, but he's been gone for a long time. Aaron, here's what I need you to do. Aaron, make us gods. And you're like, well, Aaron, you said no, right? You said, no, people can't make gods. That's what you told them, right? And Aaron actually didn't say that. Aaron said, okay, here's what we're told. Aaron does this. So Aaron said to them, take off the rings of the gold that are in your ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. So all the people took off the rings of gold that were on their ears and brought them to Aaron, and he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. That is not good, right? I mean, maybe you say this is a little weird. I don't understand this. But it would not be uncommon, it wouldn't be odd for people back then in that day and age, in that culture, to take an image or a representation of a god and fashion it so that they would relate to it or see it as a symbol. In other words, what's going on here is not that these people are saying this golden idol is our God physically, like this podium's our God. What they're saying is this represents, this is how we relate to, this is how we see, this is how we approach the God behind this. Like if you're to boil down this God and into an essence, here's the essence of this God. Now what's amazing and totally fascinating is that God, way back when he was describing what marriage would be like, he actually said, here's what we'll do. We'll actually take your rings and your gold earrings and all the stuff that you have left over from the Egyptian slavery. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to bring it to me, and we're going to make a place where we can meet. That's going to fund the tabernacle or the temple. That's where we're going to meet together. And they took the same gold earrings and the same jewelry that they were supposed to put together to meet with the real God. And you know what they did? They threw it into a fire. And Aaron makes it into a calf. And then they say this. They say, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt." Now, I did not think about this, and I did not know this before I actually started looking at this passage of Scripture. Do you see what they're doing? They're not making other gods. They're not making new gods. They're saying, this calf, this is that. This calf, this is the God that brought, this is the God that parted the Red Sea. This calf golden thing, this is the God of the 10 plagues. This is the God who showed up to Moses. This is the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and Jacob. Right here, this calf. Like, wow. Yeah. Look at what Aaron says. He says this. He's like, look. So when Aaron saw this, he built an altar. So now we're worshiping. He built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, "Tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord," capital L-O-R-D. That's the Jewish personal name for God. That's the word Yahweh. We'll talk about it next week. You see what's going on? He's saying, right? He's saying, tomorrow we're going to have a feast for this idol, Yahweh, for the God of you and me. We're going to do that. And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink, and they rose up to play. That's a nice, polite way of saying they had some kind of religious party. Right? See what's going on? They're not making new gods. Mm-mm. They're actually making their own version of God. They're not making new false gods like the wind, the rain, and hey, we got this new God for us. That old God's out, this new God's in. They're going, here's what we need to do. Moses is taking too long. This whole marriage ceremony, it's in the middle of the marriage ceremony. They're literally like going, hey, your cousin's kind of cute. They're going, hey, Moses is taking too long, God's taking too long. Aaron, let's speed this thing up. We need a God that's approachable. We need a God that's accessible. We need a God that's manageable. We need a God that's comfortable. Here's our earrings. Let's fashion the real God in a way that is easier for us to handle. Let's worship him that way. You're like, man, what was the first commandment? Thou shalt not have any other gods before me. What was the second one? Don't make a graven image, right? You're like, we're breaking like at least 1 through 3 right here, real quick. God's talking to Moses and wants to be known, and the people, right, have made him up on their own. It's like, man, how dumb is that? Man, maybe you've read this, maybe you grew up in church and you're like, those Israelites, they're hard-headed people. They just do this over and over and over again. I can't believe them. Maybe you're not familiar with the Bible and you're just going, man, that is the audacity to do that. But listen, at some point, here's something. At some point, we have to stop talking about them, start talking about us. Because the history of humanity is this, that people have made him up on their own. The history of culture is that we make him up on our own. The history, if we're to be honest, of you and of me is that we make our own version of a real God. the way that we do it all the time. They say, I don't build a God out of a golden calf out of gold. You're like, right, right. We don't build idols out of gold. Do you know what we build God out of? We'll say things like this. We'll say, I can't worship a God that doesn't make sense to me. In other words, we'll say, I'll build God, I'll construct him not out of gold, I'll construct him out of reason, out of logic, out of rationality in my mind. And the minute that I approach a God that doesn't fit within my rationality, well, then I can't do that. But so that's approachable, manageable, accessible, I'll use my rationality, we'll do that. You know what else we do? We build God out of our own views and our own opinions. And so we'll say, man, I can't worship a God who doesn't support fill in the blank. I couldn't imagine, man, if there is a God that disagrees with me on this issue, then I don't even want to know that God. It's probably more true than you think. Say, I will worship a God that is comfortable, that agrees with me, that fits in my opinions, that conforms to who I am. And I'll go to a church that holds that one up. I'll have friends that agree with that one. I'll treat my neighbors in accordance with that one. We do it with tradition. Man, we do it with tradition. We build God out of tradition all the time. It would be nice, God, if you would just be like, just chill. And maybe we could just approach you the same way every day and every week. And like we could just do this routine, you and me. Like, we got married, but that's great. We'll just kind of like, we got to pace ourselves, and so this is just our thing, and so we've always done it this way, and we can't worship a God who rocks our boat, who changes our traditions, who kind of operates outside of maybe the way that we've always done it. We do it all the time. And we'll come to church, and we'll sing to that God, and we'll pray to that God for help, and we'll point other people to that God, and we'll post about that God online. There's only one problem. He's not real. Here's what John Mark Comer says in his provocative book, God Has a Name. He says this. He wrote this, not me. He said, here's how you know that if you created God in your own image. He agrees with you on everything. He hates all the people you hate. He voted for the person you voted for. If you're a Republican, so is he. If you're a Democrat, she is too. If you're passionate about blank, then God is passionate about blank. If you're open and elastic about sexuality, so is he. And above all, he's tame. You never get mad at him. You're never blown away by him or scared of him because he's controllable. And I think he hits the nail on the head and he says this, and of course, he's a figment of your imagination. The problem with a God of our imagination is that he's powerless. He's powerless. There's no awe. There's no wonder. He's predictable. And worse than all of that, listen, when you have a God who wants to be known, and when you insist on making him up on your own, here's the thing. You miss out on a God who is real and a God who is there. Israel's down on the ground, making him up on their own. And up the mountain with Moses is the God of the universe who spoke the world into existence, who inhabits cloud and lightning and thunder. And they're like, what is that? And he's going, I want an exclusive relationship with you. I want to be known by you. And they go, we're going to choose this instead. You miss it. So you say, well, what happens? Well, what happens is Moses comes down the mountain. If you know the story, he kind of hulks out when he gets down. He's like, what is going on? Actually, God tells him. They're up there like talking, and God's like, Moses, you might want to go check on the people and see if they're still in on this deal, because there's some noise. And so Moses goes down. He sees it. He hulks out. He breaks the Ten Commandments. He runs back up the mountain. And what Moses actually begins to do is intercede on behalf of the people. He starts praying to God and saying things to God. Here's what he says. He says, now therefore, this is Moses, now therefore, if I have found favor in your sight, please show me now your ways. Some of your versions say, teach me your ways, that I might know you in order to find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people. And he said, This is God. My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. In other words, hey, I'll go with you. I'll give you rest, Moses. Other parts of this section tell us that God's ready to start over with Moses. But you see what Moses is doing? Moses is like, God, teach me your ways. Show me what you're really like. Don't leave. God's like, okay, I'll go with you. And then Moses goes further. He says this, and he said to him, if your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in your going with us so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth? In other words, he's saying, it's not just enough for you to teach me your ways so that I might know you. I want to be with you. I want to be with you. And not only do I want to be with you, but what makes the difference in this world is if your people are with you. Like you and your people. The real God, the one who is showing himself to us. We want you to be with us. That's what matters more than anything else. And God says this, and the Lord said to Moses, this very thing that you have spoken, I will do for you. For you have found favor in my sight. And then he goes, and I know you by name. And then Moses, I don't know whether he blurts this. I don't know whether he screams this. I don't know if he whispers this. I don't know if this is a question. But he says this. Moses said, please show me your glory. Now, the audacity that he would have to say this. Like the word glory here, the best way I could describe glory to us maybe today, it would be like the Bible would talk about God's glory as in like the essence, the boiled down, concentrated essence of who God is. Best example I got, if you've been here before, you've heard it before, best example I got is essential oils, right? Like essential oils, if you get essential oil like peppermint, what it is and what they're saying is that we've taken all of the extract of the peppermint and we've concentrated it and boiled it all down to this little tiny vial of peppermint that costs $100. And like if you pay $100, you can get like 1,000 peppermint leaves in this thing. Just don't you dare touch your eye because you will go blind by peppermint, right? How bad is that? Is that medically covered by insurance? Blinding by peppermint? Like don't do it. Don't put your contacts in. Why? Because all the concentrated peppermintness is right there. That's what Moses asks for. God, I want to see the most concentrated, boiled down essence of who you are. Not just enough for him that he's going to go with him. Not just enough that he's going to have his presence and know who he is. He's like, God, show me every last bit of who you are. I want to know everything there is to know about you. I want to be with you. I want to know you. Show me your glory. I don't know whether God paused or whether he came back real quick, but here's what he says. And he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. But he said, you cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live. He's like, Moses, I will do as much as I can. I will go before you. I will tell you who my name is. But here's the deal. If you see all of me, you're going to die, and then what good is that? So I'll give you as much as a human being can handle. I'll show you who I am as much as you can handle. And then this happens. So then the Lord descended to the cloud and stood with him, Moses, there, and proclaimed the name of the Lord. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed. And here's what he said. You want my essence? You want to know who I am? You want to know who the real God of the universe describes himself to be? He says this. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgressions and sin, but who by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers and the children and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation. He says, this is who I am. God in a tweet. And here's the thing. more than reference it, more than cite it, more than pray it, more than complain about it. Do you know what the authors of the Bible and the people who wrote about this verse did? They trusted it. They staked their life around it. They lived by it. And they passed it on. So here's what we're going to do, and here's kind of what I'm inviting you into for the next 6 weeks. We are going to go phrase by phrase through this section. Phrase by phrase each week. We're going to take a portion of it, and we're going to look at it. And we're not only going to just look at the phrase. You're like, is that all we're going to do? That'd be really short for the first time ever, right, at church. We're going to do that phrase by phrase. We're going to look through the Bible and see where those phrases are used, and we're actually going to see how and what this means. We're going to look at the other Bible and see if it can tell us in the other portions of the Bible what this phrase means. Second thing I would invite you into is this. And so first one, we're going through it. I'd encourage you not to miss. I'd encourage you to invite other people who might consider who God is or might be questioning who God is. Second thing, I would invite you to memorize this. I'm not talking about a chapter. I'm not talking about memorizing an entire book. I'm talking about 2 verses. 2 verses. I think if the God of the universe shows up and tweets who he is, it might be worth committing to memory. So you got 6 weeks. I challenge you to do that, whether that's writing it on cards, typing it out, working with your core community to do that. It might be a good challenge just to pick up, right? Go out to eat. Whoever does it first, buy their dinner or something. I don't know. However you got to make it happen. I think it'd be good to make it happen. Last thing, and probably the most important. I dare you, double dog dare you. I dare you to pray like Moses and say, God, will you show me? Show me where I'm off. Show me where I'm wrong. Show me where I've made you up on my own. And maybe, God, more than that, would you show me who you really are? Okay? That's what we're going to do as a church. We're going to ask God to show himself to us, to Kennesaw, to the world. Okay? Let's pray. Father, I guess the best place to start would be confession. We constantly make you look like us. And that is wrong. God, would you disagree with us? Would you wow us? Would you just push us, stretch us, grow us by who you're showing? God, I pray that you would, right now in this place and for the next few weeks, that you would show up in our lives. God, would you teach us about yourself? By doing that, change us to look like you. God, we don't want to change you. We don't want to be a church that worships a God we've made up and just stamped with the God of the Bible. God, we need a real God more than ever. This world needs a real God. God, we pray that through Jesus, through one another, and through these weeks, you would do the work necessary in our hearts.